There are only two types of federalism, truly. You either have a discernible difference between the two, as we have in dual federalism, where the federal government does its thing and the state government does its thing. And if there's any crossover, we call those concurrent powers, if there's any crossover, there's still outline of who can do what together, collectively. The power to tax is a great example of a concurrent power. But it is enumerated in the federal Constitution that the federal government has the power to tax. It's there. It's written. When you get to the marbled cake, the mixed up, you can't discern the difference between what is a state power and what is a federal power. What is the federal government supposed to do? What is the state government supposed to do? What is enumerated in the Constitution as the role of the federal government? What is not? So you're either mixed or you're separate. All right? Again, two types of federalism. When we talk about new federalism, the reason we bring up new federalism, we talk about new federalism, is new federalism is this move back, or this process, what we call devolution. Devolution. All right, so if evolution, right, it's change, devolution would be to unchange, would be go back, right? So if the change took us in that timeline that was put up, if the change took us from that relationship where the federal government's role and responsibility was, though those things that it did were big, but sparse, to the things that the federal government now does, or eventually does, is growing to this mishmash of cooperative federalism we have today, starting with the New Deal, the Great Society, and the federal government's growth beyond. Devolution would be moving back towards this layered, simplistic process. Now, we're never... Could we ever get back to this relationship between the states and the federal government where the things the federal government did were very narrowly tailored, though important, but really they were built on or rested upon those things the states could not do themselves and didn't necessarily want to do themselves? Right? A national military, right? A common defense, a common currency, right, for trade beyond the boundaries, a common set of weights and measures, a postal system, a collective bargaining unit when dealing with foreign countries. Those are all things that made sense for the states to do collectively. When you get into the issues of healthcare or education, those are things that it doesn't necessarily, or agriculture, doesn't necessarily lead itself or lend itself to wanting to do collectively. The agriculture, the ability to farm in California is different than Arizona. It's different than Michigan. The issues that Michigan faces with its fresh water are different than the issues that Arizona faces. Regarding issues of smog, of El Nino, of mudslides, of fires, of tornadoes, of earthquakes, vary from state to state to state. So you would figure then there would be different policies that these states would see as beneficial and other states would see as not beneficial, but still costly if everybody has to kick in. Whereas the common benefit of a postal system, of a common defense, of a common bargaining unit when dealing with foreign countries made sense to all the states, or at least enough sense that they ratified the Constitution. So will we ever get back to that relationship where the federal government's role is defined? We could, but it would take another constitutional convention. It would take the states, again, reestablishing the role of the federal government. As articulated in Article 5 of the Constitution, there is a process for amending the Constitution, but you would almost have to take a holistic approach and say, okay, you know what, we want the federal government to provide health care, or we don't. We want the federal government to fund education, or we don't, but to establish or enumerate those policies into place. And we won't get out of this until we have a constitutional convention like that. And there's some call for that. I wouldn't be surprised if we, in our generation, do not see that call for a constitutional convention and a reining in of whose responsibility is what, a figuring of who's supposed to do what. The paper, the press over in Jackson contacted me after the governor's State of State address, and as an educator, asked me what my thoughts were on that. And as an educator, the one issue that I thought should be brought up and really should be explained to all individuals, every political science and every political science class should reiterate that Michigan dollars are no different than U.S. dollars. Michigan dollars are no different than Illinois dollars. We have one common system of currency. Therefore, our dollars, whether they're dollars that come from Michigan or dollars that come from Illinois, all right, are backed by the same resources. Well, Michigan has a balanced budget amendment. Most states, if not all states, have a balanced budget component to the Constitution. We had circular flow up, right? We had the households, we had the firms, we had the government, right? When we were talking about deficit spending, we were getting injection, either here or here, either to the household side or the firm side, supply side economics, demand side economics, without the leakage, right? Without government taking the money out. That's the deficit spending. We're not taking enough money out. Injection without an equal amount of leakage gives you an unbalanced budget. Well, Michigan's Constitution dictates that the budget has to be balanced. What is taken and spent on programs must come out and equal the money, the revenues that come in through taxation or service fees or however the state makes its money. Now, one of the ways that the state can balance its budget is from federal stimulus dollars. The difference between those federal stimulus dollars balancing the Michigan's budget and Michigan dollars balancing the budget is the federal stimulus dollars are not balanced dollars. The federal stimulus dollars are unbalanced dollars, but they're the same dollars. And the one critique I had of our governor is that she touted the role of the federal government and its assistance to the state of Michigan. And that's all good and well to get you through the short term, that short period. The problem is we've been relying upon Washington, D.C. for more than a decade now to balance our budget. And we're balancing our budget with deficit dollars, even though the state of Michigan, the citizens, through constitutional mandate, demand that the dollars be balanced. So you and I are still going to end up having to pay, or if we're smart, if we do it right, we can hold off and just let our kids pay for the quality of life we have today. If we do it right, if we continue to do this right, we can just pass that buck on down. Hopefully we'll all die a little bit early, and we never actually have to feel the want that is being created by these $12 trillion of deficit. Okay, and that was my critique. But this is again how can you unravel the federal government from the state? You can't, as long as the states are relying upon those unbalanced dollars. And here's the rub: the state of Michigan can stand up and say, "Hey, you know what? We're not taking those dollars anymore. They're not balanced." And the federal government goes, "Oh, okay." And Illinois says, "Hey, we'll take them." And they're still your dollars. You still are on the hook, but you don't get to say, "Oh, shoot, we didn't take any of that money, so we don't have to fund that back." It doesn't work like that. Either everybody has to stand up and say, or 3/4 of the states have to stand up and say, "Enough," or the states that don't are just passing their quality of life onto the state next to them, because you're still going to get billed.
Well, wasn't it too long ago that they passed? I believe Obama passed something on the transportation, and several states said, "No, we don't want that money."
Yeah.
And Granholm went to them and said, "Look, they don't want it, we'll use it.
We'll
take their money."
Yeah.
So what you're saying is true, that even though these states didn't take it, they're still going to have to. They're still in debt over it because it's a federal debt.
Yes, it's a federal debt. That's exactly right. The federal debt's our debt. There is not a different government in Washington, D.C. It's still our government.